Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking about episode 10 of season 1 of Arrow called Burned. Now this is of course our return to the series after the winter hiatus, and this is also the episode where we are introduced to yet another DC Comics villain, that being in this case the Batman villain Firefly. And that's all really great stuff, but at the end of the day, I gotta say this is not by any means a bad episode, but it's not the most exciting episode of the series. But I'm just gonna chalk that up to really just kind of working out the winter kinks. Let's just say that. Now let's get right into it and just start talking about the story and the characters and what was all going on. And since I've already mentioned him, let's start with our villain of this episode, Garfield Linz, Firefly. Now Firefly, I've only read one or two stories with him in the comics, so I really have no great opinion about him one way or the other. In fact, really the most notable thing here is that, like Deadshot, he ends up dead by the end of this episode, which I'm sure probably does bother some people, but I really can't imagine that there are a huge contingent of Firefly fans out there. It's not like we were talking about the Joker here. But, every character has their fans, so I'm sure there are some people who are upset. But let's keep in mind, one of the things about both heroes and villains in comics is that mantles have a tendency to be passed on. So just because this particular incarnation of Firefly has bitten the dust, it doesn't mean that there couldn't be another one later on who is more in keeping with what we're seeing in the comics. Now, will we ever see such a person in the show? Probably not, but it doesn't mean that they couldn't exist. If you have... Alright, well, I've made my point there. But as for the character of Firefly, honestly, I felt he was kind of thin. And his story about how we survived the fire really... it just makes absolutely no sense. Now, okay, I have to ask, if he was not pulled out of the wreckage by the firefighters, who did pull him out? I mean, I assume that there were other types of rescue folks who came to assist with a disaster like that. So, okay, it's perfectly reasonable that some other emergency responder could have done that. But then he says he ended up in the hospital for a coma as a John Doe. Now, the tower fire sounds like it was a pretty major deal from the way it's described in the series. Do you really mean to tell me that nobody ever put a description or slapped a picture of a John Doe from a disaster like that on the news? I mean, word never got out. Nobody bothered to check to see if, this guy who was rescued from there was one of the people who might have thought to have been died in the fire, but actually didn't. I mean, the logic of what is supposed to have happened just does not compute. It falls apart if you think about it for even the littlest moment. Now, I realize that sometimes in storytelling, especially in superhero stories, there are some times when you just have to kind of go with things. Sort of like how Batman can, constantly do all the things that he does and, still even manage to get 1 hour of sleep. But, again, that's something that you do just sort of need to let go. But here, this is something that, to me, is just a little too grounded in the real world to really let slide. And I know that this is at the best subjective and maybe at worst me being completely and utterly arbitrary. Okay, I will grant you that point. But to me that just really does not work against this story. Now, again, they really didn't have a whole lot of time to spell out all the details of this, but I still think they could have done a better job. Now, one thing that I do have to give Firefly credit for is that he actually manages to further shake Oliver's already messed up confidence, because Oliver is just a couple of seconds too late to save that one fireman. I mean, the poor guy, literally falls into a gigantic pit of fire. And we do get to see Oliver having a brief moment of doubt and hesitation over that. And then he just sort of soldiers on. Now, a superhero arriving a few seconds too late to save an innocent person's life and then having, a bit of a crisis of confidence, or whatever you might want to call it, afterwards is basically a staple of superhero storytelling. And, I think that this would have been something that, well, let's face it, Oliver was already there, so, he didn't really need to go through that story, but this certainly compounded what was going on in his head. And I think a little bit more could have. I think that Oliver's that problem being compounded really should have been expanded on at least a little bit. Oliver should have at least said something about this. Instead, we just got a little shot of him sitting there kind of looking upset about the whole situation. So, yeah. Now, let's move on and talk about Joanna. Well, now there had been folks that had wondered if maybe she was a nod to the character of Joanna Pierce from the Green Arrow comics. But of course, as is established here, Joanna's actual last name is Della Vega. Now, maybe she was intended that way, but maybe it's just a coincidence. I don't know. But I do like that Jo finally gets some real depth here, in addition to a last name. Now, I mean, she's always sort of just been Laurel's friend who sort of cheers her on and tries her to kind of get her to not be such a workaholic. But beyond that, Jo really has nothing going for her. Her whole existence is tied to what's going on with Laurel. Now, here we have her with her own problems. Now, granted, she was always just been something of a supporting character, not really somebody who was probably meant for a great deal of time in the spotlight. But I do like the fact that they've taken time to, flesh her out a little bit, give us a reason to care about Joanne as an individual. And now, let's to be completely fair, the show has done a pretty good job of this. Like take a character like Carly, for example. I think she, she's still a bit of a work in progress as a character, but from what we've seen from her from the very beginning, she was clearly established as her own person. Now, granted, she was very much tied to what was going on with Dig, but then again, she was a member of his family. She's his sister-in-law, so that really does make sense. So, I will give the show some points for there. Now, I'm not really sure how I feel about Joanna going away immediately after this, but it does make sense from a storytelling point of view, and a character going away for a while and then re-entering the story, that's always good drama. And, who knows what Jo might get into during the time she's gone. So, now, let's move on. Since we brought her up, let's talk about what's going on with Laurel. Now, there's a lot of really complicated stuff going on with Laurel this episode. The stuff with her and Tommy's relationship, I just really felt that really wasn't really given enough time to cook. It just it felt like something that really should have been more important, because the Laurel-Tommy relationship is very important to what's going on here in the show. But here Laurel sort of has some issues with giving Tommy a drawer in her apartment. I mean, the guy is officially your boyfriend, and you do seem to be in a committed relationship that has been going on for a while now. I mean, I don't really think that this is too much to ask. But of course, that's really not the issue there. Laurel is very much, and even spells it out, that she's an all or nothing person. Now, when I was watching that scene with her and Oliver, my thought was, well, Laurel, it seems like that whole all or nothing thing hasn't been working out too well for you. Maybe you should take the idea that Oliver's advice and take things a little slower this time around. And actually, for a moment, I actually wanted Oliver to say that to her. But then I realized, one, that would be extraordinarily inappropriate of Oliver. He's made it very clear that he's supportive of Laurel and Tommy's relationship, but if he'd done that, he would have really, really been stepping over the line there. Now, I'm sure that Oliver probably had more that he might have wanted to say about that situation, but whatever his thoughts were, he wisely kept them to himself. So, whatever you want to say about what's going on there, I do have to give Oliver credit. He's really sticking to his guns about, being respectful of that relationship between Tommy and Laurel, and not interfering, and, just really trying to rebuild his relationship with Laurel as that of a good friend. Now, what's going on with Tommy? Oh, no, wait, we're not ready to talk about Tommy. We got to talk about what's going on between Laurel and Quentin. Now, I do like this continuing clash between the two. The idea where she lies to him and steals the phone. And Quentin very rightfully calls Laurel out, pointing out how this is her involvement with the vigilante is causing her to lie to the people that she loves, to do things that she wouldn't normally do, all of which are enormous parallels to what's going on with Oliver. And, maybe just another small step on Laurel's path to the ultimate destiny of becoming Black Canary. But this is really just another staple of the storytelling, the demands of the superhero lifestyle. It's been pointed out that even characters like Superman, who are very big on truth, constantly have to lie in order to maintain their secret identity. And some people have said that this makes Superman a hypocrite. I've never really trucked with that idea. There's a difference between always telling the truth and lying for the sake of necessity. And truth is, again, a very subjective thing. And the thing with superheroes is that if they were 100% honest with the people that they loved with, it really would genuinely hamper their ability to do superhero things. Yeah. And of course, even for superheroes, sometimes the people that you're closest to, intentionally or not, can let you down. They can even betray you. If you're familiar with the character of Daredevil, well, not to spoil too awful much, but basically Daredevil's longtime girlfriend got addicted to drugs one time and sold out his secret identity to his worst enemy for some smack. Seriously, folks, I mean, that really did happen. So, yeah, there's a reason why superheroes keep this sort of thing to themselves, even from their closest family and friends and loved ones. But anyway, the real kicker is, of course, that Quentin is also ultimately being kind of a hypocrite. He's using Laurel's relationship with the vigilante to try and take the vigilante down, simply because he's a vigilante. I mean, the lady newscaster even flat out said that the Hood is a hero, and I don't think that in general Quentin was lying about being glad that the vigilante seems to take protecting Laurel to be something extreme, to be something. Speak slowly and clearly. That the vigilante seems to have some kind of personal interest in keeping Laurel safe. I think he was being genuine there. But as was pointed out by the crime scene guy, who, until he gets an official name, I am going to continue to call Greg, just like the dude from CSI. So I do like that Greg, even points out to Quentin just how incredibly cold-blooded it is to use his own daughter to take down the vigilante. And it is very telling of Quentin's character that no matter how much good Oliver does as Green Arrow, I don't even really like calling him the Hood, but you'll have to forgive me if I'm a little inconsistent on that. He is still acting as a vigilante, taking the law into his own hands, and he's also killed some people. A lot of people have compared Quentin to Professor Inspector Jarvet, or Jarvet, or however you say that, from the famous French story Les Miserables. Wow, my ability to pronounce French has really decayed from my year of French in high school. To anybody out there who is a francophone, you have my sincere apologies. But I do like this about Quentin. It really would just be too easy if he were to become Commissioner Gordon here for Oliver. The idea of him continuing to just want to hunt down and put the vigilante away simply because he's a policeman and that's his job, that adds interesting things. And the idea of his daughter sort of being the Commissioner Gordon might not exactly be more appropriate. If you really want a more accurate parallel, you'd really have to say Harvey Dent. I mean, that's really just some excellent character dynamics. And I mean, just think about how it's going to hit the fan when Laurel finds out what her dad has done. So yeah, that's some good storytelling right there. Now, since I brought, I think that basically covers everything I also have to say about Quentin, by the way. Since I brought him up a little bit ago, let's talk about Tommy. Now, most of what's going on with Tommy this episode is defined by what's going on with his relationship with Laurel. But we do finally get to see somebody doing something about that nightclub. I know a lot of fans out there have been saying, it's like, isn't Oliver going to have to actually, start building that nightclub that he talked about? I mean, aren't people going to get suspicious about that? Well, here it is. And to throw a monkey wrench into Oliver's plans, it's his friend who's leading the charge on this. So Oliver can't just like, oh yeah, the club. That's taking a little longer than I expected. Now Oliver is really stuck. This nightclub is apparently going to happen, which just complicates his life even more. And I do like that they do take the moment to really kind of show us why it is that Tommy is really so gung-ho for this. And it's just a simple fact that he finally feels like what he does with his life has value. Now, I've mentioned that in my videos before that I work as a teacher. And I don't think I need to tell you folks, it's a tough job. But one of the things that keeps me going, no matter how tough it gets, is I feel that what I do matters. Now, I'm not expecting to change the world or, inspire some kid to run off and earn a Nobel Prize. I work with elementary school kids. But just the fact that I can make my classes fun, that I can teach the kids something, and it just, again, like I said, it just makes me feel like what I do has value. That maybe in 10 years these kids will have forgotten everything I've taught them, but that's okay because they've had fun at school. They've had fun learning. And as a teacher, that is really one of the hardest things you can possibly try and cultivate. And when I do have those days when I really just want to beat my head against the wall, I do think about those times when I really did seem to have a good and positive impact on my students. And as frustrating as working with kids might be sometimes, you'd really be amazed at how, if you can dig down and find that sort of purpose in what you do, how much it can do to alleviate a bad day. So anyway, let's continue on. Oliver, what's going on with him? Well, Dig basically does spell it out for us that Oliver is facing a real crisis of, his fear of death. He has to reevaluate how he feels about facing his own mortality. Now, Dig offers up the idea of, and this is one that I agree with, that the desire, having something to live for, makes you stronger in the face of death. Now, this is a very interesting contrast to the philosophies adopted by, say, the samurai. There's a quote I found. Let me read it to you. And this is by a fellow by the name of Yamamoto Tsunetemo. Interesting name there. But Bushido is realized in the presence of death. This means choosing death whenever there is a choice between life and death. There is no other reasoning. Now, of course, this didn't mean that if a samurai was walking along and he came to a cliff, he said, like, okay, I can find another way around, or I can just jump off this cliff. He wouldn't just jump off a cliff. It was basically always, never be afraid to die. Never back down, even if it might mean your death, is what I would interpret that to mean. Now, maybe you disagree with me, but okay. But here it is. The samurai essentially sort of believed that fearlessness in the face of death was what made you powerful. And Dig is basically countering that sort of idea with, it is having something to live for in the face of death that makes you powerful. Now, whose philosophy you subscribe to is your own choice. Everybody has their own point of views in life. And saying that one is correct doesn't necessarily negate the other. After all, people are different. For some people, it might be that complete and utter fearlessness in the face of death that is really what they need to make them strong. And for other people, it is having something to live for. Now, while I subscribe to the idea that it's really better to have something to live for in the face of death, people are different. And at the end of the day, I think both can be correct depending on the person. But in case of Oliver and the man he has become, instead of the man who he's on the island, well, I think it's not unreasonable to say that he could have made sort of he is making the transition from that more samurai-ish sort of, fearlessness in the face of death to the philosophy that Dig is espousing of, having something to live for. Which I think is actually a very important aspect of Oliver's character development. And I think they're handling that pretty well. Oliver really did just start out as sort of this very ruthless, very, completely willing to take lives sort of person. He was, in a way, like the Terminator. He has his mission, he's going to accomplish it, and, if death needs to happen to make that happen, so be it. But as we've seen, Oliver has realized that violence and killing are not the only ways to accomplish this. That constantly taking people's lives takes something away from him. That letting people into his life has value and can empower him. And that being driven by emotions like anger and rage and vengeance are ultimately a destructive path. So Oliver is walking a very, very hard road, but he is walking the road to becoming a true hero. And I do like that this episode does give us a little acknowledgement that while he's made his mistakes and still has a long way to go, Oliver has come a long way. Now, one other thing, just quickly, I did like that we got yet another mention of the Stag Corporation. Now, this is the second time, as I said, we've heard about them. And again, to remind you guys, this is a company from the comics owned by a fellow by the name of Simon Stagg. Simon Stagg, who is not exactly a supervillain or by any means. He's just an antagonist of the hero Metamorpho. Now let me see here. Yes, we have to talk about what's going on with Moira. Well, the disappearance of Walter is very much in the background here, obviously taking an extreme toll on the Queen family as well as Queen Consolidated. And I do like that this episode really reminds us that just how important Walter is to the Queen family, to Moira specifically. I mean, Walter really is the guy that kept them afloat when Oliver and his father were believed dead. And I sort of wish we could get a little bit more insight into exactly how Thea feels about Walter, what her specific relationship with him was. But the way she related the story to Oliver about how he came in and really snapped Moira out of her funk, you could tell that there was quite a bit of genuine affection between there. I really do think that Thea cares about Walter. I think that she might even not want to admit it to herself. She even admires the guy. And I think that speaks well of Thea's character. Walter has been consistently one of the most clearly moral and upright people in this series. And now he's paying a pretty serious price for being the good guy. And despite all the bad things that she's done, seeing Moira fall into what really you can only call a depression after what's happened with Walter, it really does humanize her as well. It reminds us that for as ruthless as she has been, at the end of the day, she's caught up in Malcolm Merlin's web, like a bug dealing with a spider. So, again, you really can't help but feel for Moira there. And the fact that it's Thea, who has no shortage of character flaws of her own, who really stepped up there and gave her mom the kick in the butt that she needed. And the way that she just completely threw it in Moira's face that she's been a really lousy mom lately, I mean, ouch, talk about brutal. but it was what was necessary to get the job done. Now, Thea, I think, is a character that still kind of needs some work. A lot of people have complained that the idea that she would compare what she went through to what Oliver went through on being on the same level, while she was living in a mansion and had access to billions of dollars while Oliver was stuck on an island eating like birds to stay alive. But again, you have to kind of cut Thea some slack for just being a teenager. But anyway, I do think that Thea is finally starting to kind of come into focus a little bit more. I have read the basic descriptions of some of the next episodes, and I am actually rather interested in some of the things that we're going to be seeing from her down the road. So I think that maybe they could have been a little bit more even in doling out the characterization for Thea, but I think that the latter part of this season is really going to do a nice bit to correct that. So let me just have a look at my notes here. Yes. Now, one of the mysteries of the show is what exactly does the CNRI stand for? And if you pay very close attention towards the scene at the end between Quentin and Laurel, you can actually see what it is spelled out on the screensaver on Laurel's computer. Now, I didn't know, it went by a little too fast for me, and I didn't really feel like going back and watching it again. But if anybody really wants to know, then you can just go and dig for it there. I did see that the C stood for city, and I believe the R might have been resources. But somebody who's a little bit more obsessive about this sort of thing can go back there and check. Oh, and in case anybody is wondering, my little quote from that samurai guy, yeah, that was me quoting Civilization 5. I've been playing that quite a bit lately in my spare time. Great game. I love it. Okay, so let me see here. No, actually, that covers pretty much everything that I had to say about this episode. So we're now overall. Let me put it this way. The overall storyline for this episode I thought was kind of weak. The villain here really could have used some more depth, and part of what was going on with his backstory was laughably implausible. But the individual character stuff was actually pretty good this episode. As I said, I don't think this is going to go down as being really one of the stellar episodes of the season, but it was still a pretty solid episode. And I think it was what it needed to be to sort of get us back on board with this show and set things up enough for us to continue on. I've read a little bit an interview with the producers of the show actually this morning, and they were talking about how the first 9 episodes were meant to be very, very one-shot-ish. But of course, there were very little aspects that tied together over the course of the story, and we certainly got some very nice payoffs in those 9 episodes. But from what they've said, basically, the next remainder of the season is going to be much more tightly connected, I guess, is the best way to explain it. It's not that the stories won't be mostly self-contained, but the impression I got is we're going to start seeing a lot more payoffs, a lot more things introduced, and honestly, it just sounds like the rest of the season is really, really going to kick butt. I'm the kind of person that basically will follow the news of a show but won't read spoilers. And from what I've read in terms of some of the things that have been announced that are coming down the line, oh man, folks, this sounds like it's going to be a real kick in the butt. I'm so looking forward to the rest of the season. This is, I think, going to be a real treat for all of us. And with that, folks, I'm going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Who's Your Jedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.